your Ambassador hymnals out, we're going to sing hymn number 198, My Heart is Longing to Praise My Savior. You'll see at the bottom of the hymn that it was written by Lars Oftedal, brother of Sven Oftedal from the Friends of Augsburg Lutheran Free Church. So we will sing hymn number 198. Kandiyohi County, and if I have to call it a thesis, I guess I could do so. I'm calling it the third major site of activity of the Lutheran Free Church, with, of course, Augsburg and Minneapolis being the central place of that activity. And what would you guys be the second answer? Anybody have a proposal on that? I said Fargo because Oak Grove High School or Academy. It was a bunch of different things, but. Anyway, and also too, as you'll see, that number of conventions too, that the Augsburg had the most and Fargo had the second most annual gatherings of the Lutheran Free Church, and then Wilmer the third. Now, for our purposes of our discussion today, we're not going to talk the Wilmer district is one of the regional subdivisions of the church, but I'm not going to be talking about them. But there's plenty enough to say about the eastern part right here, and so we won't be getting into Montevideo and Ortonville and Morris and all those places, but I could have, but I just figured that since we're in Kandiyohi County and it's about Kandiyohi County, we're going to talk about Kandiyohi County. So, okay, I should center here a little bit more. But the annual conferences in Wilmer, the third most frequent the word or Smith there is the word year meetings. And the Wilmer congregation, that is what is now Calvary Lutheran Church, hosted the first volume before the Norwegian-Danish Conference, before the Friends of Augsburg, that the Wilmer congregation hosted the Norwegian-Danish Conference annual gathering in 1877. So even way back then, Wilmer was playing this important role, along with 1895 also, when the Friends of Augsburg had one of their meetings, the annual meeting here too as well. So this always was an important place for activity. Oops. Okay, and in 1892, there was a meeting held in Wilmer between representatives of the Norwegian Synod, that was the more high church, church league, formal type of synod, and then the United Church, which is what the Lutheran Free Church came out of. And they had sort of a preliminary meeting just to discuss would there be any possibility we could ever work together. And I'm not sure, I couldn't figure out where this meeting was located. I mean, I don't think it was any huge public meeting. It was more just everybody, each group sent representatives to discuss would there be a possibility of this. But you see in the year 1892 that they didn't get too far in having discussions for merger, because the United Church began to have dissension within the ranks about the status of Augsburg College. But that was sort of like the first, you could say, kind of embryonic move towards the Union of 1917 was in this meeting at Wilmer. And if you're interested in reading any more about this too, if you read in, there's a two-set series of Norwegian-American Lutheran history written by two professors, Feebold and Nelson. And they elaborate on this for about 3 pages of what was discussed at this meeting. Okay, getting back to hosting in the area too, Northland Lutheran Church, which is southwest of Painesville, just across the border. Well, the church itself is in Kandiyohi County, Northland Church, but the city of Painesville is in Stearns County. But anyway, but the Northland also hosted the Norwegian-Danish Conference. I just wrote it in Norwegian, just to be different, I guess, in June of 1888. So this also was another, demonstrated again the importance that our area had in these early church movements. And I wrote down here too, it says, Oftedal gave the opening address, and I put down G. Oftedal, because that's the way it was written in the notes that I was looking at. I'm assuming that's a mistake, that they were combining Georg Sverdrup and Sven Oftedal, but somebody has to say about that?
Yeah, the old fractal script that they used, the S could look like the capital S could look like what we use as a G. So that was just simply a mistake in transcribing the fractal script.
Okay.
That should be S.
Yeah, and I figured that was a mistake, that's why I put it in quotes, but that makes even more sense. I was thinking, Sverdrup and Oftedal, they're getting the first names, the two leaders of the Lutheran Free Church movement. I think Pastor Horn, your supposition is better, that it was written in that kind of old-fashioned script that's hard to read. I have a difficult time looking at it. Well, anyway, so the meeting, Professor Oftedal gave the opening address, and the meeting was attended by 85 pastors and professors, 125 lay members, and 43 honorary members. And I'm not exactly sure what that means, if that is some sort of special guests who weren't representatives, or people just from the area that were interested, I don't know. But anyway, so here's the picture of Northland Lutheran Church, and as you see on top, it is called the Old Northland Edifice, because in 1904, this building burned down. And that had some big implications for their ministry out in this Northland Church is about 10 miles east of New London. So anyway, okay, so there was that 1892 meeting, and then there was another lay meeting about lay activity in 1895, I think was the year. And Professor Larry, or Mr. Larry Walker, has translated some writings that took place about, some writings that Professor Sverdrup wrote about these things, about how encouraged he was to hear about the work of a layman and the importance of laymen. And so if you want to listen to that, you can find that on YouTube. I'm not sure. There was also a Friends of Augsburg annual meeting in Wilmer, too, in 1895. So I'm not sure if this took place at the same time or if this is talking about two different meetings. Somebody who's read more would be interesting just to clarify if these are two different things or the same event. But anyway, so here is a newspaper report of one of the annual conferences in Wilmer. And this comes from the Wilmer Tribune. It's called the West Central Tribune now. And they reported on this. It was a big deal for the city and for the community. This is very typical, and I saw some other ones too. I know you can't read the print on there. It's not important. I'm just wanting you to see about, here's the old Calvary right there. And they covered this. This was a big deal because it brought a lot of people into town. Increased, restaurant, hotel, business, and that kind of thing. So the Wilmer Tribune was a helpful thing to gather the word. And it's sort of interesting when you think of it too, because all these proceedings at this time would have been, discussed in Norwegian at this time. But yet they always reported on it in English because the readership was more than just Norwegian. So they had somebody who really knew what they were doing. Because when I read the English translation of these, or when I read the English of these reports, they're very well written. They express the sentiments that would seem to make sense of what would have been said there. So they had some really good reporters that did good work in these. And here's just another one. You probably can't see it here, but here's a picture of the Wilmer Seminary that Pastor Quanbeck alluded to, and we'll talk more about that later. This one here is for the 5th annual meeting of the Lutheran Free Church. And there's even one edition, I don't remember if I included this in the PowerPoint presentation, that was a special report even. I think they had printed a special paper just because I had so much to say about this that it crowded out other news. Okay, and like I mentioned before, third most active center of the Lutheran Free Church if you consider the number of annual conferences hosted by Wilmer. You see towards the end here, Lutheran Free Church merged into ALC in the early 60s. So towards the end it was starting to get too big that Wilmer wasn't able to handle that kind of venue anymore, but especially in the earlier years we see that Wilmer was a favorite place to hold it. Like you see 26 times and 11 times. And there also were youth conventions too, and I couldn't find the number. I knew that Wilmer hosted the youth conventions sometimes too, but I couldn't find that information. I'll have to look harder for that. Okay, this is there's a short video. You can see it's a YouTube video on the 18th annual convention of the Wilmer Youth Gathering. Wilmer Annual Conference Youth, yearly meeting, the 20th of 1938. And so you can find this on YouTube. I thought about playing this for us, but then I thought I've got enough things to worry about technologically. I thought you can go home and you can watch this maybe about 5-6 minutes. It's really interesting to see, what a youth convention was like. It was so formal. You think of going to a fly or the annual youth gathering. Everybody's wearing shorts and a T-shirt. And this was a really formal event. Everybody's dressed up in their Sunday best. And it seemed there were a lot of older people there too. It wasn't just an event for high schoolers. It was an event that the whole community was kind of rallying around the kids to support them. And the theme in 1938 was koinonia, fellowship. And here's a clipping too. I just took my camera and snapped a picture here of this is Bernard Christensen with helping out with something with the youth gathering. Okay, and here he is. This is Wilmer Frikirkes Prestskole, Wilmer's Free Church Parsonage. And so Calvary and Eagle Lake and St. John's Pennock, which is a town about 5 miles west of Wilmer on Highway 12, they formed a parish and had a house. So this would have been the house that, I think, I'm not sure that both of them, but that's certainly one of the two would have lived in. Ole Paulson, the grandfather of Augsburg. He served in our community here as pastor in the earlier days. And then President E.E. Gienelt, who served as president 6 or 7 times or something like that. he would have lived, one of the two for sure, and he would have lived at this house. Okay, so another reason that makes Wilmer a center for Lutheran Free Church activity was the presence of Bethesda homes. And Bethesda homes had actually started earlier in Lamberton, Minnesota. It had been a children's home, an orphanage. And the Lutheran Free Church decided we want to work with older folks too. And so it was moved up to Wilmer, and this was the house. That was the first building. This was at Eagle Lake, which is, 4 or 5 miles north of the city of Wilmer. And so this got to be an important part of the ministry of the congregations as well. As you see, it was added on to over time. First, there was this building when they were operating both. It was both an orphanage and a senior, nursing home for some time, and then the children's part phased out, and then it began to focus more on elder care. And then they outgrew that space, and then later in the 1950s, as some of you know, that in downtown, well, not downtown, but pretty close into the middle part of the city, then in the 1950s, a more modern type of nursing home was constructed right next to, actually the nursing home was there first. That came in the late 1950s. Calvary, when they built their new church building, I think they moved in 1961, that there must have been some agreement too. So it's sort of interesting. I had never thought about that, even though I've lived here my whole life, that both of the nursing homes were right by the church. Because Bethesda was right by Eagle Lake, and then the new Bethesda Heritage, it was called in years coming, was right by Calvary. And just as an interesting aside now, this building is torn down. That still in the last, I don't know, maybe like 2-3 years, maybe it's only been a year, I can't remember, but definitely within the last 4 years, that this building has been raised, and Calvary is wanting to expand their parking and also add on or rehabilitate their building to allow more accessibility. They're not building on, the church isn't really growing. I mean, I think they're doing okay. It's probably like every other congregation in our community nowadays. But they wanted more space just because they don't have to park on the street and issues like that. And it was available, and once it's available, it's not going to be available again, so you kind of have to do it now or never. Okay, so in the earliest days of the administration of Bethesda, the pastor at Eagle Lake was also the superintendent of the nursing home. And that is, times modernized, and it required a little bit more of a knowledge of business and medical things. It transitioned away, the superintendent's role transitioned away from being a pastor to just being somebody, who knows how to do administration and that kind of thing. And so here we have a picture. This comes from the Our Fellowship history book of the Lutheran Free Church. Many of you have seen that. It's a book written to celebrate 50 years of ministry in the Lutheran Free Church. And so there are a few faces here. I can't remember the man's name who was the administrator there for a long time. His name was Roy Carlson. But he died in 1988, and I was only 10 years old then, so I can't remember what he looked like, but I know that he was the fellow that was the administrator. And there was his wife. Her name was Virgil Carlson. She was kind of a character. She lived for a number of years, quite a bit later than that. I want to say she passed away maybe, within the last 10 years, I would say. But she was a faithful woman of the church. She had grown up in Morris, and she had never married. And so maybe at about age 30 or so, she came down from the Morris area to Wilmer to be a bookkeeper at Bethesda. And then because she was working together with Mr. Roy Carlson, they became married. He had a family from before. So he had at least 4, if not even 5, 6 children. But since they had no children, they got married when she was a little bit older. And he was older yet and already had a family, but never had any kids of their own. But it was really interesting. I should have probably mentioned this before, but my seminary experience, I didn't attend a Free Lutheran seminary. I attended Luther Seminary in St. Paul. And I remember one of my first weeks down there was talking to a fellow who said that his grandparents were from Wilmer, and then he said his last name was Carlson. And I still didn't really think anything of it because, you know, how many Wilmer people are, his last name was Carlson. Not that unusual of a name. But then he started talking more, and then we figured out that he was Virgil's step-grandson. He was a pastor up in Tofte, Minnesota, which is up on the North Shore. Anyway, okay, so like I told you, now I shouldn't say 2002. I don't know why I wrote that on. Must have been, but that it wasn't that long ago. It was maybe only like in the last couple of years. So disregard that 2002. Maybe make it like 2016 or something like that. Sometime relatively recently. So I was torn down. Like I told you about that, Calvary purchased the building, and also that on the campus now of the new Bethesda, so now we're 2 steps in. First it was at Eagle Lake, then it was right by Calvary, then they built another one on right by the high school, right by Cashwise, by the Candy Mall. Actually, it's not called the Candy Mall anymore. I just found out the other day they're calling it Uptown Wilmer, because there's so much, malls are just, you know, it doesn't generate the business that it used to, so they're trying to expand their view of who would rent this place. So if you want to have your tax accountant office or run some other kind of business that isn't normally like, you know, shopping, that they want you to rent their space too. So they just lost to JCPenney. But anyway, so there's this third one, and it's called Bethesda Pleasant View. And then they've added on other ones too. There's a Bethesda Grand, you know, with how healthcare has evolved so much in different levels of care. I mean, in the original ones, you know, was just basically just a standard nursing home. And then now, you know, there's such a gradation of care, assisted living and independent living, and there are apartments there that are just senior apartments, and really it's no different than living in any other apartment other than you have neighbors who are all seniors. So you're familiar with that. So anyway, now that the first one, or the second one, the Heritage, the one right by where Calvary was torn down. First they built the chapel now on the second building, and there's going to be another campus coming. It's going to be built in New London. Actually, construction is underway right by the New London Clinic. And so it's really grown from the times of just being the house at Eagle Lake, and even before that, the orphanage at Lamberton. And I'm assuming that part of the reason that they wanted that location for the new care facility is that it's close to the clinic. And they've been asking congregations for assistance, and not just ELCA congregations. They approached our church council too and asked us for funds. And that was like one of the last days before everything started shutting down because of the coronavirus. I remember the CEO of Bethesda came and she shook my hand, and I remember thinking, that's kind of weird. You think she would be extra sensitive about doing that? But then right afterwards, that she pulled out her hand sanitizer and cleaned her hand. So anyway, so anyway, I thought, well, I'll just ask her a little bit about. They're coming to ask for money. I'll just ask them a question. So I asked, are you familiar with the heritage of Bethesda Homes? And she knew that it was a Lutheran heritage, but she didn't know much about the AFLC, so that was kind of fun to get to inform her about that. Okay, so like I said, 1978, this is the one that was built right over by the mall. That's not the building. They've added on to it so many times, but the original part was just probably like way over here, and they've added on so many things. So I couldn't find a good picture of that, so I just put this on here. Okay. Yeah, so now the original one at Eagle Lake is now a private residence, and it's really hard to see what it looks like now because the trees have really grown up. I think they're kind of private people. I have no idea who lives there because I couldn't get it close. I drove by, I tried to take a shot with my camera, and couldn't really see too much. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do to get a picture of this? So let's see what it looks like now. Well, okay, Google Maps. I'll look on Google Maps to look from above, and they've blocked out. I didn't even know you could do that, but on the Google Maps, it's all blurred where their house is. So, is that a real thing? Do people do that if they don't want you to see their house? Anybody know? I don't know, but it was. You could see everything else was clear. So here's the best picture I could get, but it looks like it's still in pretty good shape.
It's a government facility.
What was it, a government facility? Oh, I thought it was private residence, but You're just having fun with me. Okay, so another activity or another Center for Lutheran Free Church ministry, the Women's Missionary Federation, national body organized at the annual conference in Wilmer in 1916. Now that doesn't mean that there weren't women's groups and congregations before. It just means that there was never a national body that was coordinated that carried out these things. And so it was organized at Wilmer. The convention was there that year. Levon, would you raise your hand? You are our women's liaison for our local region for the women's group, so you're part of this heritage here. And so in the book, Our Fellowship, I can't remember what year it was published. 100 years or 50 years later would be 1947, but I have in my mind that they didn't publish the book for a couple of years afterwards. So sometime in the late 40s, whenever that was, that the book was completed, that Mrs. C.T. Olson from New London was the president. And I remember her. She was a widow, and she had these really thick glasses. I mean, they were like, Coke bottles isn't a strong enough term to describe how thick they were. And she must have really been hard of sight. Anyway, but she was a very dedicated Christian woman. Her husband died, it was just like 4 or 5 days after JFK was assassinated. So she was dealing with all her grief, and nobody else was paying attention to her grief at the moment. But anyway, so the vice president at the time of the Our Fellowship book was Mrs. Christian G. Olson. So Kandiyohi County here again was very much represented in the women's movement. Also, Ellen Gienold Larson, who was the daughter of the president. E.E. Gienold served as the president of the Women's Missionary Federation numerous times. She was confirmed here at Green Lake when her father was the pastor. And he was pastor here and at Eagle Lake. And then before that, he had been pastor in Wilmer too. But when Bethesda Homes became part of the whole parish alignment, that was way too many things for just one pastor to look after. Okay, as Pastor Quanbeck alluded to here, also there was this Wilmer Seminary, Wilmer Bible School, located on Foot Lake, and it's not there anymore. There's no sign. I don't know where it is because there's no description of the address, and I can't find out exactly where it is. I mean, it was raised many, many years ago, in like the 1940s, and houses were built over it, so there's no physical evidence of it. But there had been this poll, and I don't know why, that some of the Norwegian Synod congregations in the area, which there were some in this area, in Wilmer, a church called Vinji Lutheran, and then west of New London, there's a settlement called the Norway Lake Settlement, that part of the group was, they originally were a Norwegian Synod congregation, and then they had their big fight about predestination in the 1880s, and then the congregation separated and formed an anti-Missourian Brotherhood congregation. Anyway, so then in Crow River, north of Wilmer here, about, it's supposed to be about 20 miles maybe, on the border between Stern and Skong. So there were some Norwegian Synod congregations in that community too. It wasn't just all Lutheran free emphasis. When they were trying to pull the Norwegian Synod from having their school at Decorah to having something up here, and I don't know why that was. I haven't figured that out yet, but I know that they had pledged to have Luther College come up here, but it didn't materialize. But anyway, so instead they built this seminary, and it wasn't a seminary like a pastor's school like we would discuss. We would think of a seminary today. It was like a college. Really was what it was like, and people would study the Bible, and then they'd also study maybe like business or journalism or something like that. So the Norwegian Synod operated this facility for I want to say about 20 years, and then for some reason, I don't know if this either, I think it was because of the Depression, is what I'm guessing, but I don't know that for sure. So the Norwegian Synod started selling off some of their schools, because they also had a high school or college, I can't remember. They had a school, we'll put it that way, up at Fergus Falls, called Park Region College. And then they sold that to the Lutheran Brethren, who formed Hillcrest Academy, and they got it at a really good price. So I assume that's why the Lutheran Free Church also jumped at this opportunity to purchase the property, because they had been talking about forming a Bible school for some time. Because the Bible school movement is strong in our tradition, but the Lutheran Bible Institute had started in Minneapolis in 1919. But for some reason, people felt that we need to have our own school, or I'm not sure why, but it was started. The Lutheran Free Church bought the Norwegian Synods Wilmer School, and then it was changed name from Wilmer Seminary to Wilmer Bible School. Does anybody remember what my limit on time is here? I have no concept of. Do you remember, Pastor
You're
Farnwick?
looking at an hour.
Pardon?
About an hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I knew I'd have way more to say than. But Bible school. There was some disagreement, and I don't understand this very well, but I was reading about this in Eugene Feeble's book on the Lutheran Free Church. He wrote a history before the LFC entered into the ALC. And there was some disagreement that Augsburg owned some other property south of the campus. And there was some push to move the campus down there. And I don't remember why, if it was space or they just thought it was a better location or what. But there was some disagreement about doing this. And a way to avoid a disagreement about are we going to move Augsburg or not was, okay, we'll just locate the Bible school in Wilmer instead. I suppose that part of the disagreement too was that if we're going to have a Bible school, we're going to fit that on our present campus. So, anyway, Lutheran Free Church it wasn't very long, only 6 years, and they tried to sell it, and it was this was Depression time, so it didn't sell, and they sold it for a pretty low price too. And I just remember Pastor Lee saying once in one of the classes I was sitting in that Pastor Munseth, Francis Munseth's father, Richard Munseth, had been a student at the Wilmer Bible School. Okay, let me basically talk about that. And like I said, this vacated. Nobody knows where. I'm sure somebody does, but I don't know. And then also I should briefly mention too, this isn't technically a synodical thing, but in Wilmer there was a Christian bookstore, a Lutheran Christian bookstore. It was called Cold Portage. And I remember this, it was downtown Wilmer. And one of our church members here, Phyllis Jensen, was one of the operators of it. And I remember there was a store downtown, not downtown, but like over by Abbott Northwestern. It was just like a couple buildings down from there. And then there was also another one in Wadena that I know about too. And I don't know how connected they were. I know there was they cooperated on some ways, but I don't know exactly. But it was it's just part of the movement of that, wanting to get literature out, wanting to edify people to read Christian literature more, and Bibles, and etc. Okay, so now we get to some of the congregations. And, you can't see that very well here, but, this is a picture of the first building of the Wilmer Norwegian Danish Evangelical Lutheran Church. Down here in the corner, it was located right by the bridge in Wilmer now when you cross over the train tracks. And here's the dimensions of it. Dedicated by Sven Oftedal, the sort of second person of inspiration in the Lutheran Free Church, and Ole Paulson, December 1874. And Paulson was pastor there at the time. Okay, and as you probably know, Wilmer and Eagle Lake congregations became founding members. Their credentials were not recognized at the 1893 United Church annual gathering, and so they decided to form their own group. Okay, here was the second building. It was built right on the same spot, so they tore the building down and then rebuilt this. And it was a really beautiful looking building. You probably can't see it very good because the picture is kind of dark, but and then the name was changed from Norwegian Danish Evangelical or Conference, whatever it was, to the Norwegian Lutheran Free Church when they joined the Lutheran Free Church, of course. And then sometime too, I don't know when it was, that it became called Calvary. Now, I won't comment on that if they can't remember, but I know it wasn't. It was before the merger into the ALC. It had been called Calvary even before that. And here is a picture of Calvary, and I'm not sure if this is the first building or the second building. I'm kind of thinking it was the second building because it looks pretty wide. But sort of something interesting, and I've never asked anybody about this, but I've noticed that in a number of Lutheran Free Church congregations that there's a little bit different setup of the altar furniture. Like you see here, this congregation was originally a Haughey Senate congregation, so the altar furniture was set up more like other Lutheran churches where it's the pulpit is off to one side. But in Lutheran Free Churches, I've noticed a number of places that the pulpit is in the middle. And I don't know if that was just a time thing or if there was some theological emphasis there, the centrality of the word, I don't know. Church that my dad grew up in, Elam Lutheran Osaka, said they have that same kind of setup too, where the pulpit is in the middle. So I don't know if there's anything to that or not, but I thought maybe somebody would know something and wanted to chime in. Okay, and then the congregation had a cemetery, and this was I just took this picture here when, not a week ago or so, it was I think it was that day when it was like 93 degrees outside and it was really hot. Walking around the cemetery, but it was shaded, so it wasn't all bad. But it was, they still have kept the stone, the cornerstone. They've taken that out, and so it's Lutheran Free Cemeteries. I'm assuming that's what it stands for because it's at the cemetery. And it seems like there are quite a few pastors who did go into the merger of 1962, the ones who stayed in, or who went into the merger, but they still kind of wanted to keep their Lutheran Free Church connections or something. So a number of them retired in Wilmer, had served in Wilmer. Okay, well, the Calvary Church, the 1901 building, the second building was sold. It was torn down in 1974. The glass was discovered from both. When the first building, the 1873 building, had been torn down, and then some of that glass was put into the 1901 building, and then that got lost for a number of years, but they discovered it, and now Calvary has put that back into their sanctuary. Okay, we know that already. And there's Calvary's sanctuary. And, okay, so a little bit about Eagle Lake. There was a log church that was built, and it's formed its own parish when Bethesda came. This building, there was a building before that, and it burned before Christmas. That's what it was Norwegian again. 1913, and then 1948, they developed a parish with St. John's and Pennock, which was probably a good match to do both the kind of small rural congregations. They had some troubles there for a while. In the 1970s, the membership really went downhill, and it was so bad that they couldn't afford an interim pastor. They just had pulpit supply on Sunday. This is, a church only a couple, 4 or 5 miles outside of Wilmer, so it seems kind of silly that it should be floundering that much. But they were able to get things started up again. They had an internship program with Calvary, and got in some different pastors who were more go-getters or whatever. And now Eagle Lake is a new church building. They built in 1984, and they've used some of the old stuff in the you see the stained glass there too. It's a nice facility. Okay, the old building, Eagle Lake, was sold to this guy's name was Jay Beach. He was the ELCA musician. He played at the ELCA Youth Gatherings, and he bought it for a recording studio, but it wasn't very long. It was torn down, and now the original steeple is preserved. And it's in the cemetery. It's a little place you can hike in the shade for a few minutes. Okay, how much time we got here? So here we got Northland Church. I mentioned this briefly. They hosted the conference one time too. And here again, here's another example. This is Northland's church too. And this is the way it's been as long as I can ever remember too. It's the pulpit in the center versus on the sides. So I don't know if there's anything to that, if it's just coincidence or what. Okay, and just sort of interesting, just to give you a little background of this area. It's east of New London, and there was a evangelical free church that broke away from Nordland in the 1890s, and they called themselves the Free, that they were free of any kind of association with one another. I mean, Free Lutheran, they hadn't existed yet, but that wouldn't have been free enough for. So they had a church building about a mile away from Nordland out in the country, and then that church, they moved into town in the 1960s. It's called the Painesville Evangelical Free Church now. It used to be right on Highway 23, but now Highway 23 has been rerouted, so you don't see it when you drive by anymore. So the cemetery, of course, is still there. And Nordland had voted to sever its ties with the United Church, part of the full struggle. And on May 24th, I put the days on there because they're interesting to see how this situation moved so fast that They voted to sever ties, but then there were some people who didn't want to, because you can see they took a vote again on the, in January 2620, I don't remember, I probably wrote it down there wrong, but anyway, it was defeated. It was defeated 43-1 to still stay with the LFC. 29 didn't want to go back to the United Church. And so that situation just simmered there for a while. And then when Nordland's building burned to the ground in 1904, then that sentiment of, oh, well, we're starting all over again, why don't we just start our own group now? So there was another congregation that started out in that same area, Zion, which continues to this day. It's a pretty small congregation, but it is still there. That's the building of Zion. And they are together with a Presbyterian church in the country as well. They've been a two-point parish for a long time. I was surprised, like maybe 30 years. So they were kind of one of the first ones to do that. The first pastor that they had was a guy who had gone to seminary at Luther Seminary, but he was a Presbyterian pastor. He decided to be Presbyterian when he graduated, so he really was kind of a combination of both. And, so it's called Zion Irving because there was Zion Free Lutheran in Wilmer, and then there was Zion Lutheran Church in Spicer as well. That's was the ALC congregation. And so they always had to use the names to distinguish which one was which. And so there were 3 churches within a mile of each other. Okay, and then Gosdal, like Pastor Klondike had noted already, he preached there. And it's what, I don't know, 9-10 miles north of New London. Area called, sometimes it's called Georgeville, sometimes it's called Ringville. I don't know why it has both those names, but people refer to it as either one. And you can see that church for miles. I mean, you're maybe like 3 miles away, and you think you're close to it. And it has this large base and a large steeple for a building that really isn't that large. So it's very impressive looking. And the building, like Pastor Klondike said, that congregation was partnered with Green Lake Free Lutheran Sheriff Pastor, but now Gosdal has closed. It just dwindled down to just a few people. Some of their people come to our church once in a while. None of them have joined, but we see them now and then. So we always kind of hope that encourage them to come. It's a little bit of distance, probably 15, 16 miles, but people drive that the other direction too, so it's not like that should be the only reason not to come. Okay, so Gosdal had its start when there's a Crow River Church, which is about 4 miles west of where Gosdal was, maybe 5, I can't remember. Anyway, Crow River was a Norwegian Synod church, and their church burned to the ground also. And so there was the same kind of struggle happening because they wanted to build a new church. And I'm kind of reading between the lines. I don't really understand this for sure, and Pastor Klondike maybe could say more about this, but I'm sort of trying to interpret what was happening. And that they had called their church like the West Congregation and the East Congregation, but it was all just Crow River. So there was this idea in their minds that they were going to eventually split into 2 churches, or seriously considered it. And when the decision was made to just rebuild Crow River, where Crow River is now right up of Highway 71, then the Georgeville folks wanted to start up their own congregation instead. And it got to be a legal battle, so here it was, another church struggle that was handled by the courts, and they had pledged something, and they couldn't. The Crow River people wouldn't want to give them their money back, and the judge ordered that Crow River has to pay Gosdal so many cents on the dollar for the pledge, or I don't remember how it all went. But anyway, so this is just a little bit more about Gosdal and this Pastor Klondike. He's your uncle, right?
No, it'd be a cousin of mine.
Cousin, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I got that wrong. But anyway, and so Pastor Klondike retired. He served Trinity Lutheran in New London, which was great downtown on the Mill Pond, it's called, and then continued serving Gosdal for quite a while. So then when he retired, then Gosdal came into the FLC. And then Gosdal shared a pastor with Scandia Church up in Polk County for a while, and then with Green Lake sometime around 94. I can't remember exactly. Okay, the name of the lady who kind of ran things up there, her name was Edith Keldick. And her husband was too, but he died about 30 years ago now. And when Pastor Young died too, I think that was sort of took the energy out of their congregation. It just dwindled, so it closed, and still remains unoccupied. Okay, and here's the Trinity Church. It was called originally the Norwegian Lutheran Church of New London. And it was very interesting that this area had been settled quite a number of years earlier. In 1859, there were Swedish folks who had settled here, and then in the 1862 Dakota War, some of them left and then came back eventually. But the Norwegian congregation in New London didn't organize until the 1890s. And their pastor was shared with Northern and Godstall, and then eventually became known as Trinity and entered into the merger. So here was something that was some type of, I don't know what you would call it, some promotional material, but it showed the New London parish. And it's so blurry I can't, obviously you can't read it. I tried to look at it with a magnifying glass on the computer screen on my laptop and I couldn't read it either. But I know it's in New London because I recognize the church buildings. And so this is Godstall over here, and this is Trinity in New London, and this is Northern. And so there was a parish, and they owned a house in New London, and that's a picture of the pastor. Okay, and so Trinity merged with the Swedish church. They formed Peace Lutheran in New London, and then that building, Trinity's building, was sold to Seventh-day Adventists in New London. They've never been a very big group, but they're still operating to this day. And there's Peace Lutheran now. It's a very big building. Their congregation has decreased quite a bit in size with the way culture has been. And there's another church that started up in the area that's kind of taken some of their members. And there's been a lot of pastoral turnover, but there's plenty of space. It's a very big building. I grew up at Peace Lutheran in New London. When I was a kid, there were 3 church services and 4 pastors, and one of the pastors was an organist too. But now it's 1 service with 2 pastors. But the sanctuary is way bigger, so it's kind of apples and oranges. Okay, and just, we're almost done here, but just to give you a little bit more feel, the Lutheran Free presence in Kandiyohi County, Lake Lillian, which is maybe like 15 miles southeast of Wilmer, on Highway 7. There was a congregation there. It was originally north of the city, north of Lake Lillian. It was called Tromsø, which is it's a place in Norway, northern Norway. And they organized a church in 1885 and also belonged to the conference, but then later joined the Free Church. And the people who came, this was almost like a colony of people who came over. There was a fellow, his name was Bolstad, who almost like recruited some people. They had been sort of religious dissenters in northern Norway, and so he encouraged them to come over so they could practice freely. They were Sami, Laplander people that had mixed in with Norwegians over the years, and so when they first came to the United States, the other Norwegians called them the Finns. It's sort of a put down. But in this Lammers revival, it was they rejected the state church, they objected to infant baptism. There were some other things too, I remember. So they walked back from that when they came here and settled, but the Free Church then was the next closest thing, I guess. And so this was about 3 miles northwest of Lake Lillian. They decided in the 1940s to move into town, and so here was the inside of the Tromsø church. Pretty typical. And then I can't figure out, you see this building here and then this building here, but it's the same church. So I don't know if it was, when I first saw it, I thought there was some mistake, like somebody had made a mistake in their archival work and said that both were the same place. But you look at, there's 3 windows here and 3 windows there, even though the windows are different. So I don't know if the place burned down, they built a new one, or if it was just heavily remodeled, but it's supposed to be the same place, which I wouldn't think. But anyway, so they decided to move into town, took the Tromsø name off, and called themselves Grace Lutheran. Of course, the cemetery's there. Okay, Grace Lutheran moved into town. I cannot find a picture of Grace Lutheran on the internet. It's only not been a church for like just a few years, but I guess 10 years now, 11 years now, but I couldn't find anything. But it's there. I've driven right by it. And so there were 2. There was also the Swedish church. Also, actually, interestingly, was out in the country too, but it was the opposite direction. It was like west of Lake Lillian. And in the 1920s, they moved their building into town as well. And so this was the Swedish church in Lake Lillian, and the decline in rural population. The two decided to merge together about 2009 or so. And so they fixed up. They sold Grace's building, the Norwegian church. They remodeled the Swedish building, and now it's called United Lutheran Church. So, and they had a reputation. Sorry, you can't read that very well. That they had a tradition of some people in the Lake Lillian area who had gone to Oxford and had then participated in choirs, and then so here it was in Little Lake Lillian. They had these really great singers. And so one of the names of these families that my mom worked with, one of them, their name was Flan, that they were known for their excellent singing, in spite of, not really having studied music beforehand, or just sort of had a natural talent for it. And here is the old Grace building, the one that I told you they had sold, and it was turned into an event center. And to me, that looks like it's a really nice place, doesn't it? I mean, that looks like it's a nice facility. But when I drive by it looks kind of dumpy on the outside, so I don't know if it's been abandoned or what. I tried to look more on the internet to try to figure out what's going on. Couldn't tell. And then finally here too, St. John's Lutheran outside of Swarmhouse, West Wilmer, 2 miles east of Pennock. And it was all organized at the same time, so it's an old congregation like Wilmer and like Eagle Lake, served by the same pastors. And it's a really pretty, it's just a small church. I mean, probably like, my guess is like 15, 20 people on Sunday morning. But they kept the place up really nice. It's got a beautiful grounds. When you drive by, it's very scenic. And no, that was too small. Anyway, so they shared just listing some different parish arrangements there. And here's their altar. And now, St. John's Pennock, it had cooperated with the Swedish church in Pennock, Nommerland it's called, and they shared a pastor, but now population continuing to decline in church, less interest in church. It's now part of a 6-point parish, and they share 2 pastors between these congregations. And this is just an interesting aside, but so this Pact parish, that is the 6 congregations. There were 2 churches in Murdoch, which is just another town down the road between Wilmer and Benson. And the church in town eventually closed down, but the church out in the country has still thrived. And so the people who live in town want to go out in the country for their church. But the building's been for sale for a number of years, and I drive back and forth there. I lived in Ortonville, Minnesota for a year and taught school. And when I'd come back and forth, I thought, oh, it's such a beautiful building. It's too bad that somebody isn't making good use of the place. And what a shame that is. But I should have been more careful what I wish for, because it's been purchased by a group who is promoting worship of Odin and Thor and Balder, and they call it Balderhof, and they've got a place dedicated to the worship of Thor. And anyway, and so it's called the Asatru People's Assembly. And this is a phenomenon in Scandinavian countries that as the countries have de-Christianized, or secularized, I should say, they're also de-Christianizing the fact they're rejecting Christianity as being like a colonial force over their own Scandinavian culture. And so what you turn to then in that vacuum is they're looking to worship the heathen gods. And it also has sort of a racial element to it too. They say, well, we're just promoting white culture, or we're just caring about ourselves, but it's not just like Sons of Norway. It's more intense than that. It's sort of a borderline kind of white nationalist, if not outright white nationalist kind of movement. So this just happened maybe like a week or 2 ago. So we'll see what goes on with this, but I can't imagine the ELCA folks thinking that their building is now white nationalist. So, and then finally here I guess we round out with our own church, and I put this last because Green Lake was not a part of the Lutheran Free Church originally. We were a Haughey-centered congregation, and then Green Lake didn't follow through in the merger of 1917, and was an independent congregation for a number of years, and then eventually joined the LFC and had Pastor Dean as the pastor here. Well, just briefly here too, it's sort of interesting that and this does play in at the end, we'll see. So Green Lake here, there was a Haughey-centered parish arrangement, and there was the church out about 10 miles west of town called Bethany on Long Lake, and then there was another small church at Norway Lake called Nansen, and then there was no church in Spicer yet, so the Green Lake pastor, or the pastor of these three churches, started a service in Spicer, and then the pastor from Trinity in New London, the Lutheran Free Church pastor, also started a service in Spicer. So there were two of these groups, Norwegian Lutheran groups, going in town for a while, and they finally decided maybe it would be wise to work together. And so their compromise was that the Green Lake pastor continued to be the pastor of the new congregation, but then it didn't join the Howey Synod then. So that was their compromise, that Howey Synod pastor, but not a Howey Synod congregation. That was how they worked it out. So here's Bethany of Long Lake. This is a pretty church building too. It's been recently restored in the last 10 years. This was Green Lake's, even their confirmation classes were together. And there was a little one out in Norway Lake too. And then a merger in 1917, that church just kind of died out. And then there was a Church of God, a Norwegian-speaking Church of God. I don't know how that ever started, but they bought the building. But the cemetery, of course, is still there. And then here's Zionist Spicer, like I was just telling you about. And then Zionist Spicer merged with the LCA, the Swedish Augustana congregation, eventually formed Faith Lutheran in Spicer. So. And there's the picture of the parish arrangement that Green Lake originally was a part of. So, and then Green Lake denied the merger, the LC became on the charter 25 plus congregations of Association of Lutheran Congregations. So we can be thankful that our church didn't go the way of the world, I guess as you'd say, in these steps. I think that's a natural place to stop here with time. So I guess I'll just dismiss you for break.
Should we take a few questions? Just
if you have time. Yeah. Does anybody have anything they want to bring up?
I'm curious with the dollies here. You said your grandpa, Bigo, served one of the Free Lutheran churches in the area here.
Yeah, Big was at Northern in the 1940s.
So just that one congregation?
He had a congregation in Painesville also.
So that was that parish that you were referring to there. And
Yeah, I got that
you
here
recall what years that would have been?
In the 40s.
Okay. And then Trigby Dolly served here,
Right.
and then came back here and retired as well. Yeah.
Correct.
Do you recall what years he was here?
Ever
Was
since
that around
I
the
moved
40s
out here, I moved out here in 1971, and he was here then.
He served in the late 40s.
Yeah.
I want to say from
originally.
about maybe like 46 to about 50, somewhere in there, late 40s, early 50s. He left, and then he retired and came back in early 70s maybe.
And then he also served in Mackville, where I grew up.
Oh.
I think previous to here.
Yeah,
And then after here, he went to Kalispell, where Marty was
yeah,
from.
he was in, my home congregation was, joined the AFLC in 1964. And Trigby was the first AFLC pastor. Was just to be an interim pastor. He was there about a year and a half or 2 years. And the only comment I wanted to make about that was that that was when my father came to faith. He had been a member of the congregation since the early 40s, but because of some family issues, I had a little sister that passed away, and my dad was dealing with spiritual issues, and under Trigby's preaching, he came to faith. So, and that was led to my coming into the ministry. So,
What a
I'm very, very grateful for Trigby's ministry back then. So,
Yeah, people talk about him still all the time here
Yeah.
too. I mean, he's referenced frequently. Pastor Dolly said this, or Pastor Dolly talked about this, and so
yeah,
true heritage there.
yeah, appreciate that so much.
Did you ever tally up how many churches burned to the ground?
Oh, it was Northern Church burned to the ground, Crow River Church burned to the ground. That's the only two I could think of in the area that happened to, but I may be forgetting something. But in both cases, it caused a split when the church burned down. So
And was it lightning?
yeah, at least one of them was. I can't remember about the other one, but
Like,
it would seem to make sense that would be with the steeples like that. that would be the case.
So then you have to wonder if God had a plan in that there with
Yeah,
starting another congregation.
yeah, God's gonna need it to be, so they.
The